All right, guys. Quick as we can recap of the early Middle Ages. This is going to go from the fall of Rome all the way up to about the year 1000. This is when Western Europe devolves into chaos, and it is that stone soup analogy where the poor guy puts the pot of water over the fire and he puts the stone in it, and little by little he convinces other travelers to throw in ingredients, and it's going to take a long time for them to stew together and for the flavors to congeal and make something new. Well, that is going to be Europe over the next 600 years. Between 410 and 455, Rome is overrun by successive waves of barbarians. So when Romulus Augustulus is dethroned around 476 AD, power lay in the hands of different barbarian chieftains. The once giant Roman Empire, the empire that connected 3 different continents and had ruins on Africa and Asia and in Europe, is gone. But while these barbarians have settled in Western Europe, Roman culture was not defeated. Many of these barbarians will assimilate because of the Roman law and Roman technology. And they will all enter as Christians, which helps. Many of them practiced Eastern Orthodox Christianity or Arian Creed, but they will be defeated by one of the largest groups, the Kingdom of the Franks, hence the name modern-day France. And while these barbarians, some assimilate, the Franks are a large tribe in Central Europe that will work with the church. And the church is all powerful. We'll go get to it in a second. But the Franks begin to rebuild political authority. And one of the things they do is they conquer people and force them to be Western Roman Catholic Christians. It's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are one entity, not 2 separate ones. And so, the biggest thing to note about the Middle Ages is the creation of the Roman Catholic Church. From the time of Rome falling all the way to the Renaissance, the church is the one institution that gained in power. In large part because it maintained the governmental hierarchy, the structure of the old Roman Empire. Instead of like general to colonel to major to captain, or from emperor to governor to mayor, we have the Bishop of Rome, who becomes eventually becomes the Pope. Excuse me, I'm trying to go too fast here. The Bishop of Rome is the head of the church. He will replace the old Roman emperor. He will eventually become known as the Pope. Underneath the Pope, he has several assistants. The Pope was dominant because he was seen to replace Peter, Jesus' head apostle, the rock upon which Jesus said he would build his church. Each Pope is a successor to Peter. He is doing Peter's job as Jesus' representative on the earth. And there are a series underneath him of archbishops. Each archbishop is in charge of, let's say, several bishops, say 20 to 50 bishops. Right? They're an overseer, a department head. Underneath archbishop is a bishop. There is one bishop in every large town or city, London, Paris, Barcelona, and each bishop is in charge of, let's say, 20 different priests. There is a priest in every town and village. When the local people had a problem, they looked to the parish priest. If he couldn't answer it, it went up to the bishop. If the bishop needed help, it went to the archbishop, all the way to the Pope. The church maintained the model of Roman hierarchical government. In local school terms, the Pope would be the superintendent. The building principals are the archbishops. The assistant principals are the bishops. And the priests are there's a teacher in every classroom. It's a simple chain of command. And as the empire crumbled, When there was no political leadership left as people were fleeing into the hills, it is the church that filled the power vacuum. When people needed help, when people had questions, they turned to the Roman Catholic Church. As you know, way back when Christianity started, Christians were being hunted and persecuted. It was punishable by death to be a Christian. And then in 313, Emperor Constantine gave Christians special status within the empire. It was no longer illegal to be a Christian. In 391, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. So for being hunted and persecuted, Christianity is now the dominant religion. The church itself is able to survive the collapse of the Germanic invasions. They survived the invasions and the collapse of Rome. And it helped that the message of hope and salvation, you were going to go to heaven and live in a paradise. The Middle Ages revolves around what three things? Famine, invasion, and warfare. Life was hard. You were going to work hard your entire life and die very young. So the message of salvation helped people listen to the church. And the best educated minds worked for the church. All the educated people, most part, worked for the church. And as part of it, there were people who separated themselves and went to live in small communities like monks. And the church enjoyed the voluntary services of the monks who went out and took care of the sick and the poor. The monks separated themselves from the world. They lived lives of poverty and chastity, and they worked very hard, and they did the dirty work that nobody else wanted to do. So they were highly respected. And one of the first guys to get monks out of their monasteries was a guy named Basil the Great. He said, Jesus sent the apostles out to work amongst the people, so why are we staying behind closed doors? Let us go out and work amongst the people. He was followed by this guy, Benedict of Nerissa, who wrote the rule book for what monks should do. And he divided the day into equal portions. A time to work, a time to study, a time to pray, a time to sleep, and everything was done in 3 or 4 hour segments. As a result, the monasteries were very powerful. They were very self-sufficient. They didn't need the help from a local prince or a lord, and the people had great respect for them because of the way that they lived. And as we get going, in what is today France and part of Germany and Australia, we have the Kingdom of the Franks, founded by a strong warrior named Clovis. Clovis was of the Merovingian dynasty, Merovingian family, part of the larger Frankish kingdom. Franks was the tribe, the Merovingians were one family within that tribe. And he ran into the reoccurring problem of how do you govern such a large territory in the Middle Ages? There weren't many roads. You couldn't hop a plane or take a train from point A to point B. So how do you govern it? And he begins to use the church. The Franks went to the local monasteries and said, hey, we will be defenders of the faith. We will be defenders of the church if you monks would get the people to help us govern them, to listen to us ruling. One of the greatest of all of these rulers will be a king named Charlemagne. Charlemagne means Charles the Great. His ancestor was Charles Martel, the guy who defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours. And Charlemagne was a strong, giant warrior, and he brutally subjugated and conquered pagans and people who were not part of the empire. And Charlemagne and his ancestors dealt with a problem of feudalism, which we'll get to here in a second. Feudalism is the difficult part of how do you govern a large territory if you don't have the money to pay soldiers or to pay assistants Well, the way you do that is you give them land. You let them live on your land to govern for you. The big question is, can you trust them? Well, Charlemagne conquers the barbarians and converts them to Christianity. He builds a brand new palace in the town of Aachen on the Belgian-German-French border. And he wants it to be a new Rome, and he wants to work with the church to promote stability. So on Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne what he called the Holy Roman Emperor. The Emperor of the Holy Roman part of the empire, the Western Empire, the first recognized large-scale political leader since the fall of Rome. Crowning Charlemagne does two things. It gives the Pope recognition. Even in the Byzantine Empire, they are forced to recognize his existence. And Charlemagne gets special status because the Pope blessed him. That means people should now listen to him. Charlemagne will use the church officials to keep an eye on his empire. He sent out monks to travel around and interview the people in the different parts of his land. How is your governor treating you? All right? They were called the Missi Dominici. All right? You know, the eyes and the ears of the king. But no matter what Charlemagne did, he could never develop a loyal bureaucracy. It was proximity to authority. When Charlemagne or his men were close to a little fiefdom over here, he didn't know if he could trust people on the other side of the kingdom. One of the positives of Charlemagne is he used the money from his conquests to try to rebuild learning in Europe. And he hires Alcuin of York, reportedly the smartest man in Europe, to come and build a school to educate a bureaucracy, a very small-scale level of the Confucian schools over in China. Charlemagne, no matter what he did, realized his empire was ungovernable. No matter what he did, he could never get his separate regions to think of themselves as part of a larger empire. They only cared about their tiny little region. So here is Charlemagne's palace at Aachen. I showed it to you guys the other day. This is the cathedral. As I said, in all the cathedrals of Europe, it's nice, but it's not overly done or pretentious inside of the Cathedral of Aachen. All right, you guys are probably tired of seeing those pictures, but I like them. Here is the town of Aachen itself. All right, this brings us to the year 843. And Charlemagne only has one son that survives, named Louis. And that was fortunate for Charlemagne because due to Frankish custom, you equally divided your land amongst your heirs. Well, he only had one child, so his son Louis becomes the next Holy Roman Emperor. But Louis has 4 sons, 3 by his first wife and 1 by his second. The second wife, a lady named Judith of Bavaria, thought her youngest son Charles was going to get left out of his inheritance. So she begins to instigate trouble. And then Louis said that when he dies, he is leaving the kingdom to his son Lothar, the eldest son. The other 3 boys will get plots of land, but not as big. And they began to protest. And Lothar said, no, I'm the Holy Roman Emperor. It's singular, not plural. And so, you know, Louis Jr. gets some, Charles gets some, Lothar gets some, and one of the other son, Pepin, gets some. They weren't small, but they weren't big. Well, Louis's eldest son, that's the story I just told you, while Judith of Bavaria instigates a rebellion. She forces the 3 other brothers to attack Lothar. The Pope actually steps in and says, what are you guys doing? The Pope liked working with one emperor. I crown the Holy Roman Emperor. I don't crown emperors. You boys stop fighting. And as soon as they did, the Pope walks away. As soon as he's out the door, fighting resumes again until one of the brothers is killed. And in 843, the three brothers will divide up the rest of Europe into three separate kingdoms. And the Treaty of Verdun divides up Europe. Now, one of the disputed territories was the part of France today called Alsace and Lorraine. It originally went to Lothar. It was taken by his brother Charles. And France and Germany have been fighting over that land, the Franco-Prussian War, World War I and World War II. So up into the 20th century, people were fighting over land from this dispute in the year 843. After Charlemagne, Europe will not see an empire as big as Charlemagne until King Charles V of Spain in 1519. Just as, Western Europe was starting to come together and the stew was beginning to gel. We had the ingredient of the church. We have the ingredient of the monks and monasteries. We've got the ingredient of the Franks and Charlemagne. It looked like it was going to work, and then it just, unfortunately, collapsed. At this time, other problems. People were afraid of Charlemagne. Nobody messed with him. But at this time, around 900, Vikings will attack. Hungarian horse soldiers named Magyars, and even Muslims begin to invade. So people go into the wilderness, and they don't worry about an empire. They are looking for someone to protect them, the local strongman. It is at this time that people begin to build castles. When bad guys and invaders come, we cross the bridge, we run into the castle, and we wait them out. We become small, isolated little castle towns with no trade and travel, no diffusion, and no social mobility. And feudalism, simply defined, is when you have no effective central government. Right? There's no one king, there's no one emperor, and you've got a local strongman, a lord who is dominant. He will dominate the weak. People are looking for protection. I will work for you as long as you keep me safe. But feudalism is a two-way street. It's based on mutual rights and responsibilities. I, the Lord, promise to protect you. In return, you feed me and clothe me. You give me everything from the clothes that I wear to the food that I eat. And not that life was great, but you could only abuse your peasants so much because you were dependent on them. The other thing about feudalism in Europe is it's flexible. There's no written contract. The Lord will know if there was an invasion or a bad harvest, and he can carry you. He can tweak your taxes in a bad time. It's not a set fixed amount. So there's strengths and weaknesses to feudalism, but it's the best we can do at this time. Social classes are as usual. Number one are the king and his rich upper lords, his rich nobles. Number two are the religious clergy, and at the bottom are peasants. And feudalism simply evolves when the emperors and kings are too weak to maintain law and order. They don't have money to pay for soldiers, so they have to use land. And so here is the running chronology. There's the king who owns all the land. Each of the king's assistants are called vassals. Vassal pledges their loyalty and service. It means one who serves. Very similar to a samurai in feudal Japan. All vassals are knights, and all knights are nobles. You have to be an aristocrat to be a knight. So I, as the king, will give a fief or a plot of land to someone to govern for me. They're going to govern it for me. They're going to protect my people, and they serve as my army. When I need soldiers, they come running. Now, these fiefs can be 1 or 2 or 3 villages. They can be 100 acres or hundreds of square miles. They can be huge. My obligation as the king is to build a manor house, a large house and estate from which my vassal lives. I must provide him a house to live in and peasants to do the work. All right, there's got to be farmland, there's got to be like a blacksmith, there's got to be a miller. I provide all of that and he governs it for me. The religious clergy prays, and the poor peasants, they work dawn to dusk. They virtually have no freedoms. Their job is to simply work. And while feudalism isn't great, it does provide stability when there was no other form of government. As I said, it was also flexible and could be adapted due to the fluctuating circumstances. That is one of its strengths. At this time, Western Europe also owes a debt to Islam. Because while the Byzantine and Islamic empires were fighting each other, it gave time for Western Europe to stew. Either the Islamic armies or the Byzantines could have easily conquered them, except they were too busy fighting each other. And so Western Europeans are forced to fall back on their own resources, their Greco-Roman and Germanic learning, and they form their own separate, distinct, and unique culture. Here's just a quick kind of diagram, a few shots of feudalism. Kings and nobles, knights and peasants. Each group of these people are dependent on the others. I am the king, I own all the land, and I grant it to my upper lords. These are rich, wealthy men who I entrust with my land. They, in turn, can subdivide the land they give down to lesser lords. So if I give, let's say, Allie here, 100 square miles, and she wants to control 75 square miles and give 25 to Marissa, she can do that. Marissa is now Allie's vassal. But since I'm the king, the land Marissa's living on is actually mine. So whatever vassal Allie creates, she also creates for me, right? The king owns it all, and the land, plots of land, get smaller and smaller and smaller. Every lord maintains 20 or 30 knights who are the police and the military force. In a large-scale war, Marissa's 20 and 30 knights and Allie's 20 and 30 knights come and join my 20 and 30 knights, and now I have an army of 100 soldiers. So, step one, simple. King hands out land to the nobles. Also part of their responsibility, come on in, is to come and talk with him and meet with him. Can I help you, sir?
Yeah.
In the middle of the podcast. All right. They have to come and advise him at his court for a small period of time. All right. These nobles cannot farm or protect the land for themselves, so they hire strongmen or knights to do it for them. In return, the Lord builds them houses, manors, and gives them peasants to work with. The knight's job is to be the police force and the soldiers, but everybody in theory works for me. So there's the estate for the Lord. He has peasants living in these shacks, working out in the field, and his skilled artisans over here. It was simply the easiest way for me to govern a large plot of land when I didn't have the currency to do so. So that is a quick look at medieval feudalism. Ask me some questions tomorrow about the tax system, and I'll get to you. That's as fast as we can do here at the end of school. All right, early Middle Ages out. See you guys soon. All right, Mr. President Silva, what can I do for you, sir?